you can sort of like miss the forest for the trees a bit, right? You can become a perfect typist. You spend all your time typing so that you can like 100% nail these things. You have an error rate of 0%, right? But you aren't making shit that anybody cares about still.
You haven't written anything that matters.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 492 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm in the list.
And today is November 1st, 22x4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for letting us grab your money to help keep this podcast going. Now, we're just going to go right into questions today because the stuff that we were doing last week, well, we're still doing it. We're in the home stretch of the game, and there's a lot of kind of, I guess there's a small number of large things left that just take some time.
And a large number of small things.
And a large number of small things. We don't really have a medium number of medium things, which... That's more like an early development.
I would say that the difference now is that we know, what's left, right? That's the difference at the end.
Yeah.
Which has a different
We know what's left. We're just doing it.
You just got to burn down the big list.
Yeah, I'm still working on all the controller support. And Sam's animating and Adam's doing all kinds of localization stuff and Blork stuff. And, well, that's what we were doing last week. So no news. We're just cruising.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to go into questions today then to see what our listeners want us to talk about. So these questions come from our listeners at podcast.bscotch.net. And if you want to get your question onto a future episode, you can head over there and ask. The highest upvoted question for today comes from TimConceivable, who says, will you guys do anything special for episode 500? I think some celebration is in order. Maybe there should be a Shenanicon. So that will be in 8 weeks.
Weird.
Which will be, I think, right around the turn of the new year.
I think it's the first episode of the year.
Yeah, it's the first episode of the year.
I think somebody saw that that the episode will release on January 1st, 2025. I'll double check that.
I think that's right.
I do think we should start a second season.
I think season 2 is in order.
I think
500 episodes is... I mean, people might disagree, but I think that's probably enough episodes for a season 1. I think we've hit all the story arcs.
Are we going to do now? Because this matters to me because I had to program a bunch of things related to numbers and stuff for podcasts.
You got 8 weeks. You got 8
figure
weeks.
it out. So my question is, are we going to do this anime style where you still increment every episode number by 1, no matter what season it's in. And then you just kind of like, at some point are like, now this is actually in another season. So
yes,
it's like totally separate. You might as well not even do it in terms of like impact on episode numbers and stuff. Right. Mm-hmm. Or are we going to do it the like American style where you reset the counter and now it's like season 2, episode 1.
No. This is Fast and the Furious style. Okay.
Cool. Then
so number only go up.
Shit, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
Each season has an unpredictable number scheme that has nothing to do with what we've done before.
Yes.
Okay. So
this will be actually
the worst of all options.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You put the 2 randomly into the title of the podcast. 2 coffee, but with butterscotch. Not 2 coffees, just 2 coffee.
And then use the number 2 instead of the T's.
Instead of an E or something like that.
2 coffee with 22 scotch. 2 scotch.
2 coffee, 2
furious. Butter, 2 scotch, minus 2 furious. Plus
maybe we just need to update
coffee.
Our box art so now it says 2 coffee, 2 furious.
Yeah, we just get that real good on there and not just
coffee.
Yeah,
I think we good.
Yeah,
I think it's really because I think when you do a season turnover, and this is an interesting point for listeners not might realize on the podcast side, the discovery mechanisms associated with podcasts only kind of happen at the launch of a podcast, as far as like when you're new. So
like if we wanted to get featured on like Apple Podcasts or whatever, like we've actually reached out, I think around like episode 100 or something, and we were like, hey, like can we like how does that work?
Yeah, we had like a good number of listeners, and they were like,
oh no, we only do that for new podcasts or new seasons, so we're never going to feature you guys.
Yeah, because it's not automatic. We would still have to do something to get somebody to be like, okay, well now that you've convinced us that like something new is happening. then we'll, push it up to Q or whatever.
I think that's where, I mean, we should try to do that.
We could try it. Yeah, does anybody, I just assume at this point, at this day and age of podcasts and stuff, that it's just robots doing all that stuff, but maybe.
I assume it's robots. I guess all we'd have to do is really just, everybody's got to listen to that first episode of the new season so that it appears, you know what I mean? Like algorithmically. Because it's important to know is like we started it, I think we had like 13 listeners.
I was thinking the other day, it would be really cool if we had thought about this enough in advance to say, whenever we launch a game, that's the start of a new season.
Yeah. We can do it
because then it's like, because then it's like the journey from like the end of one game to the.
It could be every time we launch a Crashlands game, it starts a new season. Because then we'd be right on the money for this one.
Almost true. Yeah.
It only took 500 episodes. Are they? What did we?
It's inclusive though.
We started in mid 2015, so we were like 6 months before the launch.
Yeah. So
yeah.
But
the other question then is because like we haven't missed a week, right?
We did in the earlier days. We missed a few weeks, and then after that, we made sure to not.
By and large, like our hit rate is very high.
Yeah.
And so something I'm wondering is, if we want to start a second season, are we supposed to have like a gap, or do we just go like?
I think the only reason you have a gap realistically is because if you like need to prepare essentially all the content for it.
Because you're guaranteed to lose listeners with a gap.
We don't prepare.
Yeah.
So you never want to change schedule because as soon as you change schedule, you lose people. That's what's happened before, right? So I do.
Okay. That was why, because we had in our earlier days, post Crashlands launch, we were so exhausted dealing with the post-launch chaos that we still did episodes for like consistently for a bit, but then at some point we're like, we just need to like get a little extra breathing room.
Yep.
And we took like 2 or 4 weeks off or something like that. When we came back, just a few weeks after the prior episode, we'd lost more than half of our listeners. Right?
Yep.
That's when we learned about the importance of consistency.
And that is the thing, like you listen to any podcaster, that's what they'll always tell you. Is like by far the two most important things are have decent audio quality, so you're not poisoning people's ear holes because they'll turn it off instantly. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, be fucking consistent. After that, then people find you or they don't, and who knows. But if you got those 2 things like that's the requirement to maintain and maybe even grow.
Yeah, this has me thinking because like if we start season 2 with like a season 2 episode 1, episode on the day that we launch Crashlands 2, whenever that is, right? Then we could like do the season arc per game launch, and it would kind of be like documenting the journey. It won't be episode 500. It'll be some random number, but and then we could actually get some featuring in there and stuff like that.
It would make it easier to think about all of the numbers too, because like when you say there's 500 episodes, I don't know where anything falls in there.
Yeah, it's just the number just won't stop getting bigger. And it doesn't mean anything.
Like when did Levelhead start? I don't know. Couldn't tell you.
200, 300, I don't know.
See, exactly. But if it was a season,
yeah.
Okay, but that still doesn't solve this problem, which is the 500th episode.
Oh yeah, nothing's going to happen on that one for sure.
That's the question. Like, what are you supposed to do, right? Do you like recap? But it's again because we waited so long to do like a season turnover. Then like the recap is 500 episodes. I don't even know how you know what I mean.
Well, episode 100 was the first Shenana Jam that we did through itch.io. I think we did that. I think we did that on episode 100 and episode. Did we do it?
We did 3.
I don't remember anything.
The Shan Jams were so fun.
Yeah, we did 3.
Yeah, we could do. I mean, we could do something like that maybe, depending on where things are at. But also like given that it's coming out on January 1st, like, we're not even going to be around.
Yeah, we're not going to be around before that, and we're trying to get this game launched. So there's just no way we're doing anything that takes significant time.
I would just say we'll leave it up to the podcast listeners because clearly we have no idea what we should even do for I don't know how you celebrate a 500th episode. Do you know what I mean?
I think episode 500 it's just an arbitrary number. I think about it like I would be curious if our listeners would be interested in this idea of us segmenting that podcast seasonally, where each season is one game that we work on.
I'm interested in that, so I hope
tell us. Yeah, I think that would be kind of cool.
I'm mostly just curious. Like, I have nothing against like the concept. I just don't quite understand practically what that means or does.
It means we put different numbers.
Yeah. It just means that from a discovery standpoint, with each game launch, we actually have a fresh opportunity to
a little bit more of a timeline of like when things happen.
Yeah.
But what is it that we're going to do?
on the podcast.
Are we just going to say, hey, by the way, this is season 2?
Yes.
Yeah. And then we'll say that to, like Apple or like, did Google shut down their podcast
thing?
Did, yeah. I think they did.
Yeah.
Well, we would have said it to them too. And like other people who have podcast things, would be like, hey, yeah, we have a new season coming. And then they'll actually feature it because we changed what the number looks like, which is different now.
Yep.
So
Well, by the number, do you mean the episode number, or just there's going to be now a new number in front of the episode number?
it would probably have to be like season 2, episode 1.
Okay.
I would think.
Yeah.
I can see Adam's developers' gears grinding to a halt.
I know there are at least 4 things that will break once we start doing that. So,
well, we got 8 weeks. Well, I guess more than 8 weeks to figure it out.
yeah.
So
it's a good thing we don't have any other stuff going on that we have to be
Yeah,
doing.
we're just chilling right now. So we got
perfect time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, hey, we'll think about it.
We'll figure it out. Something.
Maybe we'll do it. Maybe we won't. Episode 500 is just going to be a New Year episode.
Those are honestly, I always love those anyways. Those are fun because they're retrospective, and then we get into like planning of the next year and all that stuff. And
I mean, we could do a bit more of a retrospective since it is a New Year episode, which we always do retrospective, but it's also a 500. We could go back and like kind of look at some of the earlier stuff we did at that,
And it is also
in the podcast.
It marks a bunch of stuff because it's also the lead up to launch.
it is.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because as we already have announced, the game's coming out early January, or sorry, early. What's the word I'm looking for?
Early
2025. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Early Q1.
Well, maybe not early Q1. I don't know. Q1.
Just
Sorry,
Q1.
I meant to say early
somewhere in there.
2025/Q1.
Yes.
Somewhere between January and March 2025.
So between January and March. But that's now this like tight window, which is then the lead up to launch, right? So in that time, we'll be pivoting anyway to talk about stuff related to leading up to launch, presumably. So that kind of marks a nice little separator of like the 500th episode is the original Crashlands and everything we did as a consequence of that leading up to the beginning of Crashlands 2 and creating that thing. And then we switch a year, switch the season, switch everything. And now we're in the lead up to Crashlands 2, which is intended to mark the next phase of the studio. For better or worse, depending on how it goes, right? But whatever happens with Crashlands 2 is basically going to be the signal that we're going to interpret to figure out, like, what does this mean for us running this company and what comes next? Much more so than anything we've done since original Crashlands. So it all kind of aligns nicely in that moment.
Yeah. Like a lot of things changed from episode 1 to episode 500.
Oh boy.
Yep.
I mean, we were talking about Sam's chemo treatments back then. That was like one of the hot topics of the podcast back then. And now Sam is a dad.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Weird.
That's a lot of things have changed, all for the better. So, we're cruising. So we'll figure something out. But yeah, let us know, listeners, if
you have ideas, because clearly we've never been particularly good
ideas
at
that involve us not
stuff.
doing very much work.
That's actually key, because the reality is like the podcast has always just been a fun thing we do, but that if you're just looking at it from like a should we be spending time doing it thing, there's always that like, well, I mean, it's like
do you want our games to come out, or do you want us to do podcasts?
Yeah,
so you can't really do both.
It's got to be low key.
Yeah. All right, next question comes from Gabe, who says, do any of you have a PKMS, personal knowledge management system? Ooh. If so, what do you use for that? And if not, how do you keep track of what you've read or learned?
Yes, I use Workflowy.
Sam does.
I've used it for almost a fucking decade, and that's where I have...
Not just a regular decade.
Fucking decade. And I'm one of those weirdos who's like, I basically do book reports when I read books, stuff like that. So... I have
thinking
notes
about what you've read. What a weirdo.
Oh, weirdo. I move all my highlights, my Kindle highlights and stuff into there directly. So I just have them all in there. I have like a little commonplaces system. Workflow is the only one that, how to put it, because it is not particularly opinionated about almost anything. It's just lists.
And it's simple.
Lists. It's simple.
Yeah.
It's the closest thing to just having like a regular ass notepad or journal that I found that just seems like
one that you can zoom in and out of.
Yeah, it fits really well. So like I have all of my books I've read. I got games that I've played, notes on them. Not everything, but anytime I feel like writing stuff. Some journal entries. I got stuff from like when Diane and I were dating. My notes that I would take on her about like what she like.
We used Workflowy to do all of our
planning for
production planning for Crashlands.
Yeah.
Like it's not that great as a collaborative tool, but it was good enough for like 3 of us.
It's gotten better. It's gotten actually a lot better as a collaborative tool. I still wouldn't recommend it unless your team's like 3 people or less. But
I think also the feature set is really really good if you're using it in a prose based manner. So if you're taking notes, if it's all about the written word, right? That it's really, really good for that. And I agree with Sam. It's like one of just the slickest fit to purpose pieces of software, I think, out there.
Yes.
If the thing that you're doing can be really well modeled by a tree of information, just like from top to bottom,
nested
list, basically,
lists.
with basically just stuff that's primarily about the text that you're writing. And it's got some really cool, like additional layers of stuff they've kind of tried to add in to make it more like a work management tool. So you can like add dates to things, and they've got a really cool search feature where they can like search within different nodes and stuff.
They got like
honestly a bunch of stuff I've stolen for our own internal tool that we're on.
Blork uses a lot of the interesting design stuff. They clearly figured out how to do stuff. We'd be like, that is a good idea.
Yoink, Blork.
But they have over the years they've like made it so that there's so much of that, more of like production features, I guess. Like you can turn any thing into like a Kanban board somehow, which is kind of funny.
Oh
like,
yeah.
They got a bunch of stuff now that does it. I still would I would use it just for that kind of like, again, the personal knowledge system, whatever you want to call it. But that's also where all of my art notes are from all the classes I've taken. Weirdo, but when I watch YouTube videos about art or tutorials, I take notes. So all of those are in there. And then I've like got compiled down processes for how to think about art or whatever else that were sort of distilled out of like 15 online classes of various levels of seriousness and 100 videos and books and stuff. And I kind of like piled all that down. So that's what I use for that, because I find it to be the best place for, I guess it's more of an active, a combination of, it's very easy to go in there and like add a shitload of stuff to it when you're actively problem solving. And then
because it's just like typing, you're just like type, enter, type, enter, type.
Yeah. But because it's all nested, then it's super easy to not have that be a problem, which is sort of the issue with most knowledge management systems, is the fact that you added more stuff in. Now all that shit's in there and it's in the way. It's annoying. So
you keep tripping over it.
So Workflow is the only one I found that like can just do both. I can go in there to type stuff and be focused and not be seeing 1,000 things, and then not see that information I put in there until I give a shit about seeing it.
Yeah. So I'd say for me, for personal knowledge stuff, like Workflow is top. Notion is good, but it's too flexible. In the sense that like you can't just like make a nested list like that. Like you need to like create a page, and then kind of name the page.
Yeah, it's a little clunky if you're trying to do things fast, which if you're like taking notes and you're like quickly organizing things, that kind of stuff, I find it to be just a little too hard.
Yep. It also kind of, unlike Workflowy will, like Sam was saying, it'll do a good job of kind of like hiding your information, and you can go dig it up later. And Notion is more about making sure you can kind of see all of the stuff in there.
However, Notion does have the AI assistant, which is actually pretty fucking dope, because so we use Notion, again, like the purpose of these things is important, which like we use Notion for our studio knowledge base. Yeah. Right. Which I think is not
personal. And because it's more structured and more searchable that way.
Yes. You can actually, it's better for someone who didn't put all the information there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because of,
we have our employee handbook and stuff like that. We put all that stuff into Notion. It's a great place for documentation and for a shared knowledge base.
Yes.
But yeah. Personal stuff, just use Workflowy. It's dope. It's just great.
Yep.
Otherwise, we use a lot of Google Drive for a few reasons. One is because you can put files there in a more useful way than you can like in Notion and stuff. But also because spreadsheets are really helpful for managing information. And technically, Notion's got their databases, but man, are they clunky to fucking work with. So
you can just embed this thing. It's like they have a Google Drive plugin thing. You can just
you can get it in there anyway. Yeah. So because of Google Sheets, we have that, and then because we also work with a lot of external third parties, fucking everybody has Google Drive.
Yes.
Just everybody.
Yeah.
And so
if you want to share a Notion doc with somebody, half the time they're like, what
they got to have Notion. You got to pay for seats. Probably it's a whole fucking thing.
Yeah. You can't just, Google Drive, just make a link, public link. And the thing is, I'm pretty sure there are ways to do that kind of stuff in Notion, but it's just less familiar to people. Right. And also like if they do then want to edit it, then you have a problem. Right. And so, Google Drive is just so much.
But this is a little bit noted because I'm always on the search for new knowledge management and sort of collaboration tools. And I'm always like digging into them. And the places they always like just kind of end up failing for me isn't even necessarily like the moment to moment usage of them. It's how do you work with a team with them? And then as importantly, how do outside collaborators come into play? Because most fucking pieces of software these days have a seat model where to get access to your like private stuff, if you want to give somebody else access, it's like you have to be buying a seat for them to have, like GitHub does this for like their private repos. Like, so that person might already be paying for an account themselves, but now you have to also pay for a seat for your organization for that person who touches something like once a year or whatever. Like the whole thing is so stupid. And so a lot of why I like Google Drive so much is because you just fucking you just say this is shared with this email address and you did it. You don't even think about whether or not the person like is allowed to do this or has paying for it or whatever.
Most of our like I guess more like biz devy or like more collaboration oriented like business stuff is in that Google Drive kind of in that bucket, right? So our presentations, spreadsheets, financial stuff, some of those even like design docs or stuff like that it's just, again, it's just a document and it's kind of easier to deal with than like having to do stuff in Notion when you're trying to kind of just go. So I think that's like the Google Drive is like biz dev almost, or like biz operation stuff. Notion is like a more what I think of as like it's a studio management thing, right? Like you mentioned, we have our employee docs and stuff like that, but also it's more of that because the whole thing is just so much more searchable. For whatever reason, Google Drive's overall interface, I just think it's garbage. It's always been garbage, and I cannot figure it out.
It's ultimately treated as a collection of files.
Which is so fucking weird.
And versus Notion, like I think why like Notion works so well is because it's a nested hierarchy of text documents, right? And so it doesn't have the same kind of like barrier between any two documents that you have in like Google Drive. And so to like Google, the thing that's like nice about Google Drive, that ability to share things in this really varied, easy way, also makes things a lot more complicated for just like seeing what's in there, right?
Yes.
And like knowing what's in there and like organizing things, but also makes it more complicated for finding stuff because depending on, because like when you just do a search in there,
I can only search basically.
And even when you are searching, it can be depending on how something is shared with you, whether or not you own it, if it's in like a third party's like drive system versus yours, things might not even show up, even though you technically have access and stuff. So it's a little just messy over there. Versus Notion, and it is a lot easier to go from like being like, I know somebody did something about this, and then like finding it, right?
Yes.
So there are tricks you can do in Google Drive that are awesome. Like you can add file descriptions that become searchable. And now anytime I'm doing anything with any files in Google Drive or Notion or anywhere else, I just throw keywords into every single individual like file like element. You know, I just put keywords in there, and things like localization are one that like kills me because when I'm searching for something loc related, I might search for loc, I might search for L10N, I might search for localize, I might search like the variants
or maybe like the name of the localization company we're working with.
So like there's so many different ways to like that I'm like imagining my future self trying to get there that I then experience myself doing. You know,
when we made all of our like a bunch of the BizDev kind of pitch decks and stuff like that for Crashlands 2, they have either CL2 or Crashlands or Crashlands 2. And so it's like, Google Drive, I don't know what the deal is as far as organizationally there, but like
I don't know about you guys, but like I tend to treat Google Drive documents as disposable.
Yes.
By and large, where it's like
a repository of important documents. Does that make sense?
Yeah, important documents that you can't find, you know, because like, so it's like it's really nice for like if we want to say like, okay, let's figure out this contract or something.
Yeah,
right?
I think of them more as transient than disposable, right?
Sorry, not disposable, and like we don't throw it away, but it's like
we
it'll
need
be hard for me to find it again.
Yeah, but it's okay.
It's great. It's great for like when you because it also shows you things by recency, right? So like if I'm working on like we keep our podcast outline information in Google Drive, but we touch it every week And so anytime I open Google Drive, it's
Easy
one
peasy.
of the files like right there. But then, or like if we're working on a contract with somebody and we're like shared with our lawyers or whatever, then because it's being actively worked on, it's at the top, right? But once we're done with it and we haven't touched it in a couple of months, I don't know where the fuck it went.
Yeah.
It's just
That's
in
actually
the
good. Yeah,
pile.
it's not a place for things that you need to reference with any frequency, basically, if that makes sense. Like as
It's good for active documents.
yes,
that you'd
active documents, and then like
work on.
again, this kind of biz devy layer,
Yeah.
So I think as far as like distance from the self, it's like to me workflow is closest. I know some people use Obsidian, which is a very cool.
Yeah, Obsidian
markdown.
is not good for collaboration. Like
Yes.
technically you can do it in very hacky, cumbersome, bad
But also,
ways.
I found that like it's. So I tried using it. I think about halfway through this year at one point just to see because like Adam, like just poking around with these things every so often, and it kind of has the same problem to me as Notion does, which is just the way that it breaks up how you make stuff.
Yeah, it's just
You're
a
making
bunch of
very
files.
separate posts or whatever else. Just again doesn't quite fit. Like I think workflow just is the easiest one as far as everything is just in a big list. But yeah, so it's like workflow closest to self, like biz dev layers, Google Drive, and then Studio repository of like when I need to go
Notion
know.
and Airtable are two.
Yeah, what did we do for this negotiation thing? It's not in Google Drive, it's in Notion. What did we do for how are these Crashlands 2 skins for creatures put together? I can't fucking remember because I did this like 6 months ago, but I'm gonna touch it again. Notion. It's like, does that make sense? Like it's like technical reference almost is in Notion.
It's just documentation.
Yeah,
You guys remember
postmortems? Like I've been like taking
Yes,
notes of our
postmortems.
marketing event, our marketing efforts for Crashlands 2 and stuff. I just have like a breakdown of what we did, what the outcome was, what I think that means, and what we're going to try next, right? So that we have this like history of our marketing efforts, and so yeah, so it is used for this kind of like archival sort of purpose as well. And the reason is because it's both discoverable and searchable.
Yes.
It is real hard to organize and reorganize between pages. So that's the part that I don't like. And they have that really cool feature where you can make
it's
those, like,
kind of clunky, right? Like
it's just too clunky for fast use. But docs aren't supposed to necessarily be like fast to write because you should be putting in some thought and effort and like
the documents, not bullet point notes. Like it's
yeah.
Do you guys remember ClickUp had documents? We tried to use ClickUp documents for a while.
Yeah.
But man, we just could not figure that shit out.
Because part of the promise there was like, okay, they live alongside now your task management, which is part of the reason why.
But in a way that was very difficult to kind of
I think that's
interpret.
It's to me the same thing as like because I know a lot of smaller businesses now do use Notion, like especially a lot of startups and even game companies and stuff. Like smaller teams will use Notion as their like whole kit, right? But
like their work management
and this knowledge base.
Well, it's good because like to Notion's credit, its main thing is that it has, frankly, in my opinion, too many features. But the benefit of having all those features in one place where it's like collectively searchable and like things are in place and so on is that if you're in a state of a project or a company or whatever where you don't yet know how things work and you need things to be dynamic and need to be able to like reshuffle how you're approaching things, whatever, and that's more important to you than efficiency of the system, then like Notion is the perfect thing because you can keep using that and iterating on it for a long time to
I agree
a pretty significant scale. But as soon as you're like, we know how this works now, you need structured systems that are fit to purpose, right? And Notion is beautiful because it's fit to all purposes and no purposes, So it's really useful in early stage things or things that don't need a lot of structure.
Yeah. So I think that covers all the bases, top to bottom. Next question comes from OopoongaToppak, who says, you mentioned in a recent episode that between game jams, released titles, and personal projects, you've tried your hands in making games of many different genres. Have you ever tried making a rhythm game? Alternatively, have you ever messed around with synchronizing elements of a game with music, like background foliage bobbing to the beat? Bard Fatley. So I'll talk about this one a little bit.
Yes, you got.
So I have played around with rhythm game stuff, sort of like as fun prototypes. At the outset, it sounds like it can be difficult to do, primarily because once you understand how games work with frames. So for example, if a song is at 120 beats per minute, right, then that's a half second per beat, right? If your game is running at 60 frames per second, you'd be like, okay, then that means 30 frames per beat. Except games don't really run at 60 frames per second. They run at roughly 60 frames per second. It modulates up and down. And so you can't actually use frames. You have to use time. to sync up the beat. But even then, you can't just say like, has it been a half second since the last beat? Because if the frames get jiggled around just a little bit, then it might come a little bit late and things will desync over time. So there are some pretty simple ways to kind of keep things modulated and keep things synced up. And once you've figured those things out, then you've got your next problem, which is why? Because if you sync things to a rhythm, then you of course need to make sure that the music is playing in such a way. Like for starters, the music has a rhythm, and then also
shit, obviously,
one that you can feel so that you can do stuff.
Yeah, and of course, in a game like Crashlands 2, we actually did talk about like early in Crashlands 2 development, we were like, oh, it'd be really cool if you go into like Polari villages, and because like they're all about beatboxing and drums and stuff like that. If like all of their if we had like a fat beat going in the music of the village, and then like the characters were all like animated in a way that synced up to the beat. We did talk about this. This was like something we planned. Then in Crashlands 2, I won't spoil anything, but it turns out when we get there, that's just not appropriate for what's going on in the game at that point, and it wouldn't have made sense. It wouldn't have made sense for us to like make such a peppy kind of a mode, right? And then kind of the other thing there is just like, if you want to make a rhythm game where like the rhythm is the game, then you have another kind of content problem, which is now like music is such a core part of the content that, like in our case, we work with Fat Bard, who does it. They do a great job of putting together all our tracks and stuff like that. But they're not in our studio. They're a third party, and trying to sort of like do something that deeply integrated into the gameplay with a third party can be very, very challenging. I think the final bit there is like, at this point, the games that we're making are much bigger. And if music is at the forefront, the music can get a little bit old after like 100 hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like in a game like Beat Saber or Guitar Hero, like you'll play the same songs over and over again, but you play through the song start to finish, and then there's a break, and like you go to a menu and like decide what to do next, blah, blah, blah. But it's not like, it's like you're just like out in an open world area and just listening to the same song on a loop.
I think the closest
for 6 hours.
I don't know if did you guys play Hi-Fi Rush?
No, I haven't yet.
So it's good. It's really good. And it basically uses rhythm to be like, to enhance the action gaming aspect of it. And you do have to develop good rhythm. You know what I mean? Like in order to do the combat and stuff. But the way that it works is, how to put it? It's like, because you could play it, you need to be on rhythm to do more incredible attacks and stuff like that, right? To like really chain stuff together and like get that flow going. But you can still like, it's not like a Guitar Hero thing where like you hit the wrong note and it's like, and you just like, you fucked, it's like a bonus thing. And then the way it fades in and out is, I think, really clever in their case, where it's not like Crypto the Necrodancer, where you are also, you have to move, everything is on the beat all the time, right?
Yeah, that's such a cool. It's a dungeon crawler rhythm game. If people are,
it is one of my favorite games.
It's great. Yeah,
that's so fun.
And so I guess what's interesting to me is like with Hi-Fi Rush, they managed to thread that thing where the biggest challenge to me with a rhythm game is the fact that rhythm games are driving, right? They are very driving because you
keep going,
stay
moving.
on
boom,
the beat.
Boom, boom, boom.
So the question is like, okay, can you make it so you don't have to stay on the beat all the time, or like, and it just happens?
It's kind of exhausting.
It's exhausting. Yeah, so we care with it.
Yeah.
But then I think the closest thing we made, which I don't think counts at all, but was I Know CPR. As far as because you had to. It's a platformer where there's a really big guy, a big yellow guy,
a person suffering a series of chained heart attacks.
Yep.
And you're on his back and you have to defibrillate him every time.
Yep. But
it's a co-op game, right?
It's a co-op game, yeah. But you're platforming too. So like the more the big guy moves, the more. If his heart rate spikes, then he will have a heart attack, and then the little guy has to. It's not like, I think pretty sure it's pretty fucking weird and great. I
forgot about that game.
It's very fun. So
go to bscotch.itch.io. Right, pretty sure that's right.
It's probably on there. Yeah, it's old. I don't know if it still works.
A bunch of other weird shit is
that
on
was
there.
fun.
So
I think that's the closest. I don't think we haven't done like a rhythm game.
Now there's just
for all these reasons,
so many things that are hard about it from both a design and implementation perspective, like you guys were saying. So it's one of those, like, you have to really know you want to do that, right, and have a really compelling reason to do it. Because game development is already so multidisciplinary, right?
Yep.
the moment you have, like you guys are saying, the moment you have like a rhythm game, right? Then you're basically saying like now the music is also like of exactly equal importance to all the rest of the design elements.
The gameplay, UI, storytelling, all that stuff.
Which is a cool thing to be able to do. But like in our case, we want to have as many elements as we can get away with not having full fucking like attention, because there's already so many things.
Well, it's an integration problem. Yeah. Like if the music is more standalone and exists alongside the game, then you can make decisions independent of that. So like an interesting example is in Crashlands 2, we have a stat called haste, which increases the speed at which you perform your attacks and actions and stuff. Well, if it's a rhythm game, you can't do that, right? Because now you're off the beat. And so you'd have to figure out how to make
unless
that
the music
work.
also goes faster now, and then that has to make sense for the music. And
but only while you're swinging, I guess. So even just stuff like after our first round of playtesting in Crashlands 2, we were like, we think that all the most the weapons and abilities should just be a little bit faster. Just shave like a tenth of a second off of those things, right? Well, if it's all synced to the music, we have to go to the bards and be like, so can you redo all the music?
or be like, hey, we have this thing, and we're gonna take the thing you made that has a particular BPM, and we're gonna speed it up by like 10% because we need to. And it's like, as a person who made, again, on the art side, I'm making animations which have the same problem to a degree, which is they're basically music, right? You got a score sheet of beats happening.
It's meant to be received in a specific way by
exactly. So as soon as it starts being just kind of time dilated, where it's like it's longer, it's shorter, it's like doing whatever, it doesn't hit quite the way you necessarily want it to, right? And so you're like, damn it, could you just not fuck with my music, at the end of the day?
I will say that there is one thing that kind of, in a weird way, kind of bums me out about making like open world games is you do need the music to be a bit more ambient and less front and center, right? And I love music with a good beat. Like Levelhead was so fun to make because we could just kind of go nuts with the music. And if you haven't really played Levelhead, you can at least go to Spotify and just look up the Levelhead soundtrack that the bards put up.
Some bangers.
There's some bangers. It's a very good. You could use it as a workout playlist.
It's
or
part
something.
of my programming music rotation is the Levelhead music.
Honestly, I think it's why. We still have. I'm not gonna spoil it because I don't think we haven't shown anything about it. But of course, we have some good and beginning music in Crashlands too.
Yeah,
and that's one of the few tracks where you can go as hard as you want because it's brief. So we're just it's so fucking.
I think it's set up so that it'll just keep going until you hit a button, though, right? So you can
you
can experience it as long as you want when it happens.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you only get to experience it in those moments.
And the boss music, I love the boss music.
The boss music is pretty good.
Anytime we get to go as hard as we can, they're going. The bards,
we want it. Yeah.
We're like, please unleash yourselves. They're like, yes, and they kind of go Super Saiyan mode. It's just kind of fun. But it's I don't know. Rhythm games are fun, but they're tricky for all the reasons. So we haven't wanted to do one enough, I guess is the short version.
Yeah. So probably won't, but anytime we can get good.
I do love
good beats in there. We try to. Yeah. So our next question comes from Ronniethebear, who says, programmers, do you ever feel too reliant on autocomplete in your IDE? Sometimes I'll only type 2 to 3 letters and then look at the autocomplete drop down to find my variable name when I could have just typed the word in less time. Well, let me tell you, we don't even use the GameMaker IDE because we wanted not just autocomplete, but we wanted GitHub Copilot.
Yeah. I want all complete.
The fancy autocomplete you can get.
So Adam literally made a VS Code extension, which we have talked about in several past episodes, VS Code extension called Stitch, which is basically an IDE for GameMaker, but that can use Copilot. And so you can work on your GameMaker projects in VS Code. And I don't really use autocomplete because I have Copilot. And I'll type 2 to 3 letters and not get the next word. I'll type 2 to 3 letters and get the next 10 fucking lines of code. I can't just take it wholesale usually, but it's pretty good.
Yep.
It's pretty accurate.
We've talked about this a fair bit in the past, I think, what it means use Copilot and stuff. But if you use it, if you're well integrated between how you're writing your code and how you're using Copilot, and most importantly, you do know what you're doing, then it can all come together to make a really nice thing work. Because my experience with Copilot also is that I use it instead of the more normal code-based autocomplete. And it's basically because most of the time it's fast enough. Like there's a little bit of a wait there, but like it's most of the time it's fast enough that I don't really feel like I'm waiting. And most of the time it's going to give me a whole line that is exactly what I was going to write.
Yes.
Once it goes beyond a line, it starts getting a little fishy, right? But for a single line, like almost every time, that's what I was going to write. And
and of course you double check it.
Yeah.
But it's pretty good.
Oh, yeah. So when it comes to that, then now it doesn't feel like I'm like just wasting time by being like, oh, I just waited for it autocomplete rather than, typing it. And I think the thing too is like if you're using a fast IDE with just regular autocomplete, then that actually is saving you keystrokes, because also a good IDE will also be surfacing like the variables that you used most recently and that kind of stuff. So you're just hitting like a button to trigger it so it comes up, and then like enter and you did it. So it's not, and it's basically instant, right? So you still are saving time and keystrokes, which to me it's more importantly I'm saving my hands, because the less,
and you're reducing error rates
that's actually,
by not having typos.
That's what I was going to get, which I think that it's a really important note, which is that while it's true that you can oftentimes type the variable name faster. What you cannot do is 100% of the time not make a mistake while typing it. And on the art side, on the programming side, whatever else, when you're actually doing the work, like you are the hand that is typing the code, you are the hand that is drawing a line, whatever. If you look at how your work flows, not making errors is actually the way that you go the fastest. Yes. And it sounds dumb and obvious, but it's also like sometimes that means doing a thing in a way that is sort of like, how you say, like in the moment, slightly slower than what you would do if you were able to nail it perfectly. Right.
Yeah. So if you're not taking
you're a person,
hitting
you're a person. Yep. And so I think what happens is like, if you're, it's like drawing a straight line, right? For me in Clip Studio, whatever. So it's like, yeah, I could draw a line that's like straight enough, right? To connect some stuff, but part of the time,
get the straight line tool and
exactly.
Well, this is where I want to
error, right?
Yeah, so I want to kind of pick apart the question on this level, because the question, at the start is, do you feel too reliant on autocomplete in your IDE? And that's an interesting framing, right? Because I don't even know what that would mean, but it's a kind of sentiment that I hear from people in a variety of different contexts. So one of the things that I noticed, like, when I was in India, there's this idea of like, nobody really takes a pain pill. Like if you get a headache, you just got a headache. You just suffer through it, and the sentiment that I always heard from people was like, well, I don't want to become dependent on it, which of course there is an addiction issue for certain types of pain medications.
Yeah, not for ibuprofen, but
not for ibuprofen, right? And like, yeah, of course you don't want to take too much of it because it'll fuck up your liver, right? Yep. But if you're getting a headache once a week and you just pop one ibuprofen in there, and then you can just carry on with your day completely fine, right? Or if you tweaked your neck because you're 35 and you looked in your mailbox weird, and it's just fucking you up, and it like hurts to drive because you can't turn to look at oncoming traffic. It's like, there's a certain point where if you say, I don't want to become dependent on it, well, you are dependent on it. You're just choosing to suffer without it. It's kind of the same as like, I don't want to be dependent on food, but you are though. Like you're dependent on so many things that make your life better.
You're saying it's an interesting frame because it's the arbitrariness of where you're drawing the line.
What's the win? Right.
Yeah. As a person, you are not independent. You're dependent on a trillion things: clothes, air, clean drinking water. You need food. You need a community. You need friends and fam. Like you need so many things. And then you just at this weird spot, you're like, but not that. I don't want to depend on it.
The question is, yes, what are you potentially losing, right? Because for this to be the question, but because there has to be some downside, right? I mean, there's an implied that there has to be some kind of downside.
Because the idea is that you would become worse at programming, or you would become sort of like less familiar with your code or whatever by taking the thinking part out and having something else do the thinking for you, which I've experienced with something like a GPS. Right. Like,
yes.
Like even if there's a place just like a mile and a half down the road, if I only go there every like 3 or 4 months. I don't really like take the time to remember the landmarks or the street names or whatever.
You're a passenger to a degree, right? You're not really paying attention.
Yeah. And then of course there's that like, well, like what happens if the GPS isn't there? You know, it's like, well, I mean, I'd still get there. Mm-hmm. I would just like probably miss a turn a few times. Right. And so in a way, like I am dependent on the GPS to get me to this place each time I go there. But does it matter?
Yes.
Does it matter? Like, does it matter at all? And what are the chances of that scenario where I just can't do the thing anymore because I've lost the thing that I'm dependent on? And what will the consequences of that be, right? And if you like kind of add all that stuff up, it's like, yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, I think there's
just take the tool and be fine with it.
Yeah, because I think dependencies, it's one of the weird frames. I think in particular in like Western and very American culture, like the idea of being dependent on something is bad.
Weak.
Yeah, it's always bad, right? Which is just sort of odd, actually, when you really tear that apart, because it's, as I was saying, the reality of being a person is being like a nexus point of dependencies, truthfully, right? Both people who depend on you for stuff as well as like you're integrated. You don't want to be like an island, you know. I mean, like trust me on that. It's not like a good time to be.
Is lonely. Someone called it a lonely island.
Yeah, but also it's the sort of thing like if you think about it in a programming context, right? Well, you could just write stuff in text, like just text, right? But
yeah, is syntax highlighting something you're dependent on? You know?
Yeah, you know what I mean. It's like, but I think it's where it gets interesting because I think there's always a sensation of like whether or not you're real enough. Like, are you a real enough programmer if you are using X kind of tool?
Let me tell you, I programmed Crashlands in GameMaker Studio, which did not have IntelliSense.
Yeah, I still don't know how the fuck you did that.
Of pretty much any kind. It's basically like programming in Notepad, where like, I didn't have autocomplete on variables. I didn't have any of that shit. I had to just remember all of them. And when we launched the game, it had several thousand bugs.
That's what happens.
And that's literally not an exaggeration. It was weeks and weeks and weeks of fixing bugs. And you know how many of those bugs were because of typos and shit like that? Probably most of them.
Yeah, so I think that's what it's an interesting like thing that happens, I think, in like from a community context, like when you're programming or when you're doing art, you know, people get weird about even in art. You see a lot of YouTube videos where people who are already really fucking good, I mean, like pro level, are giving these tutorials, and they're like, one of my tips is like turn off the line stabilization on your pen tool. You know, you got to learn to make straight lines. And I'm like,
but you don't though, because you have a line stabilization tool.
Actually, I fucking don't. And I was
so why would you need to learn that?
Yeah, and again, like from what I said earlier, I agree that if it was the case that I had better line control, like again, lines being my equivalent of typing, that if I more consistently was able to put down exactly the line I wanted, would I make things faster? Yes. What training is required?
But how would you make things faster? Because you have a line stabilization tool. So even if you could draw lines perfectly, they would still look exactly the same.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So it's like, so again, it's like, is that the point that someone needs to be focusing on here? Like really is autocomplete somehow holding you back from becoming a quote unquote better programmer, right? Or is any tool? Is
that time? Because the question that I have is where is the time going instead, right? It's like when the case of like the line tool, it's like Sam, you could spend a whole bunch of time like perfecting your freehand line work, right?
Yes.
But because you're perfecting other stuff that doesn't have a system that you can just like use off the shelf to go do, right? And so you're basically, this is the whole idea of progress, right? As you stand on the shoulders of something else before, and now something else gets to be the focus of where your efforts are going and where your learning is going, because you're not gaining something significant by learning that particular. It's like cursive or any of kinds of things, right?
It's not necessarily cursive. I think because I think to a degree, it's like we talked about typing speed being important, right? We've talked about that podcast before, like the getting good at the basics level of the task, right? Like literally the physicality level of programming, typing, drawing, line work, right? Is good. It's almost always good. It's just the sort of thing that like from an opportunity cost thing, you need it to a degree depending on the tool. You know what I mean? And then you kind of don't fucking need it anymore. And you really got to ask the question, like, is my time better spent, you know, like trying to be hardcore about this, or can I just do the thing I came here to do? I didn't come here to draw fucking lines.
Well,
that's like
importantly though, importantly, time you spend on skills enhances those skills, and other skills that you are not spending that time on deteriorate, right? So like if I spend a lot of time typing, which I do, my handwriting will deteriorate, which it has.
Yes.
Yeah, my handwriting is fucking garbage.
My handwriting used to be pretty fucking neat. It was very clean.
Every time I write now, I'm like, what is this? Who is this person?
Now I'm like, what do I do with my hands? Do I write with my left hand or my right hand? I can't remember.
My hand gets tired instantly too when I'm trying to write something. Just like no stamina left.
And so, you have to think about, like, it's like Adam was saying, if Sam spends a bunch of time working on how to draw a perfect line, even though he already can because he has a tool that does it, right? Then he's not spending that time developing other skills, and those other skills are deteriorating.
I put it this way,
right?
The goal actually of dealing with the fundamentals is not to have the capability of delivering on the fundamentals. Like that's not really the point. It's actually so that you can
understand and enhance the stuff above it.
Yeah, so you can move up layers of abstraction because that's really where the meat comes in. Like the reality is, let's say we're going to hire someone, programmer, right? And they were like, look, I like basically only type 4 letters at a time, and then I just use autocomplete. But I can architect and build these really robust, gigantic systems that like feature like they're just beautiful. They self-test, whatever.
I like you said, but instead of so.
Yeah. So yeah.
So I can do all this other shit.
Well, I'm saying like if you want to, that's true. If you want to view it as a antagonistic, right, versus a complementary, then I would give a shit because the reality is like no one cares about how well you can type.
Well, I think it's one of those.
What are you delivering?
Because I think the nuance here is there's a whole bunch of nuances here. Because I think it is a fair question to ask in general, which is given some tool that you're using, some practice that you're using, or whatever, asking the question is me using this a net positive or negative because of
always
consequence, right?
Yeah,
always a worthwhile question. For this any given specific thing, who knows? It's also going to vary by person, right? But from this idea of like, because I'm a strong believer in like in the fundamentals of like knowing as many fundamentals as you can, to me is like always good, right? That's not the same as being an expert in the fundamentals, right? So
you just got to understand them.
Yeah, knowing enough, right? And so, and to me, there is like, I start getting really suspicious when somebody's operating at a high layer of abstraction and seems to not understand anything about the fundamentals.
Yeah.
I'm extremely suspicious that person can be successful. Even if I see success in the moment out of a specific thing that they're doing, I'm really skeptical they can adapt to like a new scenario.
But it goes both ways. If you've got somebody who's like a programmer and they obsess over assembly language, right?
Yeah, it's like, can you create an entire application? And
like it would take you forever. Like there's a reason why we've developed abstracted languages that go on.
But it's not only that it would take you forever. It's also that all of your time is going into stuff that isn't.
It solved problems.
It's not the problem that you're trying to solve, which is to build an application, for example.
Correct. Right? That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Because if the effort is going into, because I spend like working on these, like this work management tool that I'm working on, right? I spend so much time just thinking about design, and I'm trying to operate at a level of like the tooling and the programming language, all that kind of stuff, where all of that stuff is as close to the layer of abstraction I want to be working in as possible. I need to understand a lot about what goes underneath that so that I can successfully operate there. But I don't want to operate at those lower levels because
you don't need to create what's underneath. You just need to know what's underneath.
Yeah, I need to know what's underneath so that I can basically say like the layer of abstraction that I need to design this application is the same layer of abstraction I'm using when I then go to implement it. Because if those things match really well, then now you're kind of like optimally fast in terms of like accomplishing the goal you're trying to accomplish. And so
I think that goes back to what it comes down to. What is the goal? What is the goal? Because I think that's and this is what moves. This is where all the nuance comes in, which is because that moves for you as a person depending on where you're at and what you're trying to do, right? But I think the goal is if you get a little too stuck on the fine like the fine skill aspects of any one of these kinds of things, then you can sort of like miss the forest for the trees a bit, right? You can become a perfect typist. You spend all your time typing so that you can like 100% nail these things. You have an error rate of 0%, right? But you aren't making shit that anybody cares about. Still,
you haven't written anything that matters.
Yeah, that's why I think that's where it comes in. And
it's true. Ideally, you're doing both. Ideally, you're a perfect typist and operate at high layers of abstraction. But most of the time, for most people in most contexts, you got to choose between some pair of things.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like when people talk about like LLMs or ChatGPT or whatever, where they're like, it's an incredible technology that can spit out incorrect information faster than anything on Earth. You know, it's like, it's really, really fast and good at something that doesn't fucking matter, you know? And so,
or sometimes can matter a lot depending on this context thing, right? Which is the trick. Like the reason why ChatGPT would be so useful, any of these AI tools, is because they remove that fine skill development piece from a lot of stuff. Like typing as fast as ChatGPT, crazy. Because like that thing is just you can't. It's like you can't compete on that fine level, right? And you're not going to be able to compete on that fine level with a lot of these things. And also, but you do need those skills. And so I think the tricky part is that I think in a lot of ways, and even while we're discussing it, you know, I'm doing it too, but like we're framing some of these things as like ors, right? Mm-hmm. When in reality, you need enough skills on that like really fine base level to be able to functionally move up the ladder so that you can start delivering things that actually matter to people, right? But I think
it's like, so Sam, you were taking like gesture drawing classes and stuff like that, right? Because you were developing not like how to draw the perfect line, but just like, why would you draw a line this way instead of this way? Exactly. Like it's developing this understanding of how to think about how these things piece together, but you don't need to spend 2 years just making perfect lines because you can skip that part now because you've got tools, right?
Right. Or the reality is, again, like I can do it as like a supplement sometimes, which I do. You know, I still do either some line work in the mornings or gesture drawing every so often if I'm feeling like it would be useful because of the thing I'm about to do to be like a little more. It's like when we occasionally will go do like type racer game before work if I'm like working on biz dev docs or shit, right? Because I know that when I kind of like warm up with that, I'm just
get into typing mode.
Yeah, it's like a modal thing, right? So I still use it, but I think that's the trick is knowing when to focus on it or not. There's a really good video by an artist named Peter Hahn, who's like a great teacher who is one of the, like I'd say one of the modern times, like if like most digital artists have both know who he is and have taken one of his classes even, right? And I took one of his drawing classes a couple of years ago, and he's very very technical, very process oriented, very structured, right? Which works great for teaching lessons. But this video is fascinating. It was recent where he was at a conference and he was drawing live, which he like never does. And he was talking to them about this recent struggle he's been having, which is like he's so technically skilled now, but he's been having a hard time. He's pushing out of things that don't follow the technical rules, right? So when he's pushing things gesture-wise.
He's got too many rules and he can't break them now.
Yeah. And so it's like you also have that problem, right? Where you get locked up in some of the stuff you think is important. Again, it's all about what you're trying to deliver at the end of the day. Because it's not a problem for him. It's not like a problem. You know, he's still very successful and he was able to deliver on all of that stuff he's made before and as well as teaching people tons of stuff because of that technical focus. It's easier to teach people that technical stuff. But when it comes for him of saying like, I want to make stuff that's a bit more expressive and a little more like just kind of wild and out now that I have all this skill, and it's now that part's hard because that's not the skill he was building the whole time, right?
It's just a new skill.
It's a new skill, but it's hard. It's hard when you have such strong like fundamentals.
Strong opinions.
Opinions about the fundamentals to then like switch gears and recognize that what you're building there is just you're actually at zero again, if that makes sense, in this place. But it looks like, or because you can like touch it, because you can type or draw whatever it is, it looks like it should be the same, but in reality, it's a completely different skill set operating sometimes on a higher level, right? And so I think the trick with this question is basically figuring out like, what are you trying to do? If you're trying to,
I think you're saying that the better you get at something, the more specific that thing must be, sort of definitionally, right? So if you're investing fuckloads of time getting extremely good at something, whatever that thing is, that doesn't give you necessarily the capability, and in ways can be inhibiting of the ability to then move to the side, and
right? Or even to integrate that skill into a broader set of things, right? Because it's like the less you understand about other things, the harder it is to deploy what you know, right? So, which is why like people always talk about there's that saying like jack of all trades, master of none, which is thrown around as a negative, right? Mm-hmm. But the full saying is what, like, jack of all trades, master of none is
still better than a master of one.
Still better than a master of one, right? Because like if you have approximate knowledge of many things, then you can integrate those things in ways that other people can't see or can't understand. Mm-hmm. And the integration of knowledge and skills is where like real creation happens.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I guarantee like if you look at, you know, the art for the game or whatever else, if you were to look at it from like a, let's say, pixel artist perspective, I know that there's shit in there that's like an actual pixel artist would be like, these are bad pixels. You know what I mean? I know that an animator looking at it is going to be like, you can animate this a lot better. Right. Like, yeah, sure. Any one of the things could be a lot better, but you know what? I could do all of it.
The whole fucking game.
Yeah, it's all there. So I'm able to realize a whole fucking world because I don't have to get too, I worry about it to the point that it delivers on what I want to realize. And that
because you also have to make buildings and terrain and environments and characters and UIs and buttons and, you know.
Yeah, and the end result is your particular blend of things, which is then the style. That's the style of the game that makes it unique. Right.
Yeah. So in the programming context, I think it's interesting because it's like when you're writing code, I feel like this is a conversation that only happens within the community itself. Does that make sense? Like that's always a useful question to me. Would someone who doesn't know how any of this is made care at all about?
Yeah, that's why I don't participate in programmer communities.
Exactly, right? Because
there's always these people marching around with really, really strict opinions about what's good, what's bad, what languages are good, what languages are bad, you know. And I know, like, for example, Adam uses JavaScript for tons of stuff, TypeScript, right?
And I love it. I love the language.
Mm-hmm.
But I also understand why people don't. It's because they don't know enough about it yet.
But also, like, I could probably find at least 1 million people who would say that Adam is using the wrong language for the things that he's doing.
Oh, absolutely.
But they can't do what he can do.
Also, he's delivering. I don't care.
He's delivering shit, right? Like he's making stuff with it that they think shouldn't be possible because they're just too.
It's like there's a reason I did, right? It's because I know that any given language is not the best tool for any specific job, but the best language is always the one that you know, right? And so for me, it's that if I can know one language extremely well and that language is very versatile, which is basically...
Then you are versatile.
I'm versatile, even if any specific solution isn't
maybe
ideal,
could have been a little bit better in a different...
Yeah. And so everything I do now, whether it's something that's making a little command line tool that we run in, you know, on our computer, or if it's a web server, or if it's a front end website, everything that I make now is in JavaScript. Everything, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, every once in a while I'm making something I'm like, man, this is
probably not the right. This is not might not be the right tool for this job,
but whatever, it'll get the job done, and I can move on to the next thing and learn something in the process. But I also wanted to say about this discussion of like, if we go back to the idea that it is important to ask the question for any given sort of approach that you're taking to something, is this a net benefit? And also, even if it isn't a benefit, so I'm going to keep it. Is there a cost that I need to be offsetting somehow? Right. Mm-hmm. So if you are becoming really reliant on autocompletes and on fancy autocomplete, like a Copilot or something, right? Mm-hmm. So that you're finding yourself just typing a lot less. Even if that's a net win, because you're able to accomplish the goal with a lower bug rate, all this kind of stuff, assuming all that's true. It also is probably true that you're becoming a worse typist, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm becoming a worse typist. I am.
And so if that's becoming a problem that you need to deal with, there's a more appropriate way to deal with it than to turn off autocomplete, which is to go practice typing, right? Like you could practice typing.
Take 15 minutes at the start of each day.
And in fact, if you took all the time that you saved having fewer bugs and typing less and moved all of that into just practicing typing for its own sake, the outcome would be that you still get to have a better time doing both of those things, because now you get to have fun practicing typing and you get to have fun doing the work with fewer bugs and so on, right? And the net effect and time spend could be the same.
Yep.
Right? You don't have to be saving time to do these things. It can also just be saving effort, saving mental effort, reducing bugs, all this other kind of stuff.
It's a very good point, which is that the response to any of these like particulars on like reliance on things is so often like a throwing the baby out with the bathwater sort of vibe where it's like, I turn it off because I'm hardcore. And it's like, I mean, if you're worried about your typing skills, just
practice
do those. If you're worried
honestly, you're not that hardcore because you should be programming on pen and paper.
I know this thing. It's
like write it out by hand,
right? It's like you can't ever be hardcore enough for some people, and like fuck those people.
And it doesn't matter.
Yeah, just deliver.
Who's making good stuff? That's the real question.
And a lot of the arguments that you hear in like the programming space are, and I assume artist spaces too, are about hardcoreness. Like that's part of it.
They are, yeah.
But there is a real like reason to ask the question, which is just like, I'm worried about my typing capability, right? Is a completely fair concern. I think the thing that I always raise my eyebrows at anytime I hear these is when people talk about it with respect to other people. That's when I'm like, because people will say things like, I don't know if we should be using things like Copilot because new programmers will X. And it's like, are you one of those new programmers you're talking about? Or are you just making random fucking guesses?
Let them deal with their own problems.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and it's worth exploring the space, right? To try to like guess and infer like what would be the consequences of these things on these different groups. But just stating as fact that this is the consequence on that group of which I am not a part, right? Is anytime I see any of those,
presumptuous.
I'm just like, safely ignore, just move along. But they can be, because you can see the argument, like if I can take my Copilot, you can see the argument both directions of saying, well, new people don't learn the fundamentals if they're just like, oh, this is what Copilot said, I'm just going to take that, right? Except that their code won't fucking work if that's true.
Yep.
Right. So
And then they'll have to learn how to debug it. So, maybe it's fine.
But I think, again,
debugging is a more useful skill than like knowing which fucking characters. But
here's the thing. I think the reality is, to me, it's that if your focus is entirely on the craft, I think it's very easy to get derailed into being overly concerned about like the particular impacts of certain methods or else. I think if you can successfully move your focus to the delivered impact of the thing that you are trying to do, then all this kind of goes away. Because again, like to add to your point, if you're using Copilot, but your fucking programmer doesn't run, well, guess what? Now you got to go debug some shit you don't know about, which frankly is good. That's a good skill.
That's like, just how it always happens with programming anyway.
Yeah. If you, let's say you successfully make something with Copilot and you launch it and no one gives a shit. Great. Again, like the point is like, there's a thing outside of yourself that will tell you whether or not the stuff you're making is good, worthwhile, whether or not you're doing it fast enough. But it only matters if you can get something across the finish line in that regard, right? And so I think that to me is where
it's the same as because it's what people worry about with things like Copilot. I assume with automated art tools and stuff, or things that help. Is always like, well, you're going to discover later that this would ended up being better. It's like that's how I learned programming by myself.
Exactly what I mean. It works the same.
I put shit into production, and then like 6 months later, I was like, oh shit, this is
Yeah, or you spend like a couple hours making a piece of art, throw it on Instagram. No one gives a fuck, right? It's like, okay, well. Am I reading that as a signal? Like, should I read that as a signal that maybe I'm not making the thing? I'm not making a thing that anyone cares about. That's always the question at the end of the day. How you go about making it, I'm like it's all just nuance and kind of whatever to me. If you can just make something that it's so hard to make something people care about. So like, just try to deliver on that higher level piece. And I think don't sweat the details too much. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's sweat the details, but not in a
sweat the details
way.
Sweat the details
when they matter.
In service
of that final goal. Yeah. I think it's exactly right. It's
not for the sake of being sweaty.
Well, I think to answer a question like this, which is like, am I becoming overly reliant on this? Right? Those aren't absolute questions. So that is the core point of asking, what is my goal? Right? Because the only way to answer that question is within the context of the goal. Right? And so if your goal is to become a extremely fast programmer who is not reliant on tools, so that when the APIs go down or when you have to use Notepad++ for some fucking reason or whatever, that you can still accomplish things, then you actually do need to do things in hard mode kind of all the time.
During that 1 in 1,000 moments, you'll be just so much better off than everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The rest of the time, that's questionable, but you do you.
So if you have a goal like that, which I don't even think is unreasonable, if part of your professional goal is sufficient, if it's a certain level of autonomy that doesn't rely on other tools, I don't think that's necessarily, depending on how far you take that, I think that can be a detrimental goal for both you and the people you work with. But to a point, I think it is a reasonable thing to kind of do. And so if part of how you're making these decisions is in service of making sure you're maintaining and deepening your more fundamental skills, then I think that's a perfectly valid thing to do. If your focus is purely on production and output and then long-term stability and all these other kinds of things, right, then that changes the shape of what it is that you're trying to do, because then some of those fundamentals matter less, some matter more, and it just determines where you're going to put your focus. So given that we all have finite time and you're always choosing this or that with anything that you do, right? Or I guess it's this or 1,000 alternatives, right?
This or those.
Yeah. The thing you always have to know first is what's the fucking point? And no two people have the same point, which is why so many arguments about this stuff don't make any sense.
Yep.
Yep. Know
Also,
thyself.
I will say people who already have the skills of any particular skill can, with like, I would say almost just sort of just always seem to forget how acquisition of that skill might be hard or time consuming for someone who does not currently have it.
And how messy it is.
And how fucking messy it is. And so like whenever someone's like, you just need to get better at line work, typing, whatever else, and they can already do it really fucking well. They don't.
Because
It's
30
not
years
wrong,
ago.
but it's not helpful.
Correct. Yes. You already learned when you were a baby. This is what I mean saying on the art stuff. Cause like I started doing art when I was 21 with a mouse in a vector program. And so
most like artists who like people think of as artists and think of themselves as artists have been like doing it the whole fucking time.
Just the whole fucking time. Like they got so much more mileage on me. And when their brains were forming, you know what I mean? So like having one of these people tell me that my lines just need to be better. And then I'm like, yeah, but I need to make stuff like.
No, not that your lines need to be better, that you need to be better at making them absent of assistance, which is a different thing because your lines are great.
Right. So it's like, I don't know. That drives me a little crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not helpful.
Yeah. You just got to think about why. Right. So I hope that exploration of the topic somewhat helps you triangulate the answer to your conundrum.
I would be curious
to
to
rely
know.
on autocomplete. I don't think you are. I think you're good.
No. I'd be curious to know like what is your goal and why did you think that this might be a problem?
What prompted you to ask that? You know?
Yeah, if you pop into the podcast channel on Discord and give us some more context on this one.
Yeah, I'd like to know what's going on over there. And that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DeCoster for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it up the charts and help it have a successful launch, and we would appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. See you next week.
Goodbye.